March 28, 1942, 0134 hours, the Loire estuary, occupied France. HMS Campbeltown, a 23-year-old American destroyer that the Royal Navy had written off as expendable, is travelling at 19 knots directly toward a concrete wall. German shells are tearing through her thin plating from both banks. Her helmsman is dead. His replacement is wounded. The bridge is a chaos of smoke and shrapnel. Lieutenant Nigel Tibbits, the officer who designed the 4.5 tons of explosives hidden in her bow, steps forward and takes the wheel himself. Campbeltown strikes the southern caisson of the Normandie dry dock and drives 33 feet onto the lock gates. Her bow crumples exactly as Tibbits calculated. The hidden charge, buried beneath the deck and sealed in concrete, is now positioned perfectly against the 160-ton steel gate. Lieutenant Commander Stephen Beatty glances at his watch. He turns to his crew and says simply that they are 4 minutes late. Within hours, that charge will detonate while German officers stand on her deck. It will kill over 250 of them. It will destroy the only dry dock on the Atlantic coast of Europe large enough to service a Bismarck-class battleship, and it will keep the most feared warship in the German fleet, the 42,000-ton Tirpitz, bottled up in Norwegian fjords for the remainder of the war. The ship that delivered this blow had been built before the end of the First World War. She had been in American reserve for most of her life. She was so obsolete that the Royal Navy had filled her with explosives and sent her on a one-way mission. How did a ship nobody wanted become the weapon that changed the Atlantic War? To understand why Campbeltown mattered, you have to understand what kept Winston Churchill awake at night in the spring of 1942. On May 27, 1941, the German battleship Bismarck had been sunk after a chase that consumed most of the home fleet, but her sister ship Tirpitz was still afloat, at over 50,000 tons fully loaded, with 8 15-inch guns and 12 inches of belt armour. Tirpitz was the heaviest battleship ever built by a European navy. No single British or American capital ship could face her alone. Churchill was obsessed. In January 1942, he wrote to General Ismay that the destruction of Tirpitz was the greatest event at sea at the present time. He called her the Beast. He said the whole strategy of the war turned on this single ship, and he was right to worry. The mere existence of Tirpitz in Norwegian waters forced the Royal Navy to maintain no fewer than 2 modern battleships and a fleet carrier in home waters at all times. Warships desperately needed in the Mediterranean and the Pacific were stuck guarding against a threat that might never come. But here was the strategic nightmare that haunted the Admiralty. When Bismarck was damaged during her Atlantic sortie, she had been heading for one specific port, Saint-Nazaire. Because Saint-Nazaire contained the Fort Mécluse Louis Joubert, universally known as the Normandie dock after the ocean liner it was built to accommodate. This single facility was 350 metres long, 50 metres wide and 15 metres deep. It was the largest dry dock in the world when completed in 1933. More importantly, it was the only dry dock on the entire Atlantic coast of occupied Europe capable of servicing a Bismarck-class battleship. With that dock available, the Kriegsmarine could afford to risk Tirpitz in commerce raiding operations. Any damage she sustained could be repaired without the dangerous return voyage through Royal Navy-controlled waters. Without it, any Atlantic sortie became a one-way gamble. The RAF could not solve the problem. The Butt report of August 1941 had revealed that only 1 in 3 bomber crews claiming to attack a target actually got within 5 miles of it at night. The caisson gates were 167 feet long, 54 feet high and 35 feet thick. Precision bombing was impossible with 1942 technology. Only one option remained, a direct assault, and it would require a ship. HMS Campbeltown began life as USS Buchanan, hull number D-131, a Wickes-class flush-deck destroyer. She was laid down on June 29, 1918, at Bath Iron Works in Maine. Launched on January 2, 1919. Commissioned 18 days later. She was one of the mass-produced 4 stackers that formed the backbone of America's First World War destroyer fleet. Standard displacement of 1,090 tons, length of 314 feet, beam of 30 feet 6 inches, 4 Parsons geared steam turbines producing 24,000 shaft horsepower on 2 screws, design speed of 35 knots. Her original armament consisted of 4 4-inch guns, 1 3-inch anti-aircraft gun, and 12 21-inch torpedo tubes in 4 triple mounts. She spent most of her American career in reserve. By September 1940, when she was transferred to the Royal Navy under the Destroyers for Bases Agreement, she was already obsolete. The Royal Navy designated her Town class and renamed her Campbeltown after a town in Scotland. Her early British service was accident-prone. She collided with one steamship in November 1940, sank a British coaster later that month, and collided with another merchant vessel in December. By January 1942, she was at Devonport dockyard for repairs. That was when Combined Operations Headquarters selected her for a one-way mission. The conversion took approximately 17 days. Workers removed her third and fourth funnels entirely. The remaining two forward funnels were cut at a slant and the forward funnel enlarged to resemble the silhouette of a German Mu-class torpedo boat. At a distance, the deception was convincing. All 4 main guns were removed. All 12 torpedo tubes were stripped out. All depth charges and throwers were taken off. In their place went one 12-pounder gun on the forecastle and 8 20mm Oerlikon anti-aircraft cannon. Armour plating was fixed to the deck amidships to protect commandos lying flat during the approach. Only enough fuel and water for a one-way trip was loaded. The goal was to reduce her draft to approximately 9 feet, shallow enough to cross the mud flats of the Loire estuary rather than the heavily defended dredge channel. But the heart of the conversion was invisible. Lieutenant Nigel Tibbits designed a demolition charge consisting of 24 Mark 7 depth charges, each containing 290 pounds of amatol. Total explosive weight, 4.5 tons. The charges were arranged in 4 columns of 6, packed into steel tanks built into a fuel tank behind the forward gun support. Spaces between charges were filled with concrete, sealed with a steel lid, and cemented over to conceal them completely. Tibbits calculated that the crumpling of Campbeltown's bow upon ramming would not extend far enough aft to disrupt the charge. He was right. The detonation system used 2 independent mechanisms. Primary fuses consisted of 2.5-hour pencil detonators hidden in a wardroom table leg. Backup fuses were 8.5-hour acetone cellulose delay devices embedded directly in the main charge. Once those backup fuses were activated, nothing could stop them. The flotilla departed Falmouth at 1400 hours on March 26, 1942. 400 miles of open water lay between them and St. Nazaire. The force consisted of HMS Campbeltown under Lieutenant Commander Beatty, 16 Fairmile B motor launchers, motor gunboat 314 carrying the Naval Commander Robert Ryder, and Commando Commander Lieutenant Colonel Charles Newman, motor torpedo boat 74 carrying delayed action torpedoes, and 2 Hunt-class destroyers as ocean escort. Approximately 611 men in total, 346 Royal Navy, 265 commandos. On the morning of March 27, the destroyer HMS Tyndale spotted U-593 on the surface. Tyndale opened fire and dropped depth charges. The submarine crasher dived and escaped. When she surfaced hours later, her commander incorrectly reported the British force heading west toward Gibraltar. German command dismissed the contact. 5 torpedo boats that might have intercepted were never dispatched. At 2200 hours, the beacon light from HM submarine Sturgeon appeared dead ahead. The force was exactly on time and exactly on course. At approximately 2300 hours, Lieutenant Tibbits went below and activated the 8.5-hour backup fuses. The clock was now ticking. The RAF diversionary bombing raid began at 23:30, but was largely thwarted by cloud cover. Only 4 aircraft bombed targets in St. Nazaire. Worse, the unusual bombing pattern aroused suspicion. The commander of the 22nd Naval Flak Brigade ordered all guns to cease firing and searchlights extinguished, but placed every unit on heightened alert. At 0030 on March 28th, the convoy crossed the shoals at the estuary mouth. Campbeltown scraped bottom twice on mudflats but pulled free. At 0122, searchlights on both banks illuminated the entire convoy. A naval signal lamp demanded identification. Motor gunboat 314 replied using captured German recognition codes. When a shore battery fired warning shots, Campbeltown signalled that she was a German vessel being fired upon by friendly forces. The bluff bought 5 critical minutes of reduced fire. At 0128, roughly 1 mile from the dock gates, the deception collapsed. Beatty ordered the German flag lowered and the white ensign raised. Every German gun opened fire. Under devastating close-range fire from both banks, Campbeltown accelerated to 19 knots. Her Oerlikon crews fired continuously at German positions. When gunners fell, replacements ran through shell fire to take their places. Colonel Newman, watching from motor gunboat 314, later wrote that the weight of fire caught one's breath and that her sides seemed alive with bursting shells. At 0134, Campbeltown rammed the southern caisson of the Normandie dry dock. 36 feet of bow crumpled forward of the hidden demolition charge. Approximately 113 commandos scrambled ashore even before she stopped. Lieutenant Stuart Chant, already wounded in the right arm and left leg, led his demolition team into the main pumping station 40 feet below ground. With 90-second fuses set, the explosion destroyed the pump house completely. Lieutenant Corin Purden destroyed the north winding house. Lieutenant Bob Burtonshaw demolished the south winding house. Both pump houses and both winding houses were destroyed within minutes. The motor launch teams fared far worse. Of 12 troop-carrying launches, most were destroyed by close-range fire that ignited exposed fuel tanks. 13 of 16 motor launches were lost. Only 3 launches and motor gunboat 314 survived. By 0230, it was clear no boats would return for evacuation. Newman gathered surviving commandos and ordered them into the town, intending to disperse and walk to Spain. 400 miles. German reinforcements sealed them in. By dawn, ammunition was exhausted. Approximately 200 survivors surrendered. If you're finding this deep dive interesting, subscribing helps more than you know. Through the morning, German search teams boarded Campbeltown but failed to discover the hidden explosives. Rumours spread that the ship contained chocolate, coffee and whiskey. Scores of German sailors, soldiers, and approximately 40 senior officers swarmed aboard to loot souvenirs. At approximately 10:35, the 4.5 tons of Amatol detonated. The explosion demolished the forward half of Campbeltown and the 160-ton caisson, sending a wall of water crashing into the dry dock. Between 250 and 360 Germans were killed, including most of the inspection party. Beatty was being interrogated at that moment. His German interrogator had just been mocking him, saying the damage would not take long to repair. Beatty smiled and said they were not quite as foolish as the Germans thought. 2 days later, the delayed action torpedoes from motor torpedo boat 74 detonated at the old entrance lock gates. The explosion triggered total panic. German guards opened fire on Organisation TOT workers fleeing the dock area, mistaking their khaki uniforms for British commando dress. The question of whether one destroyer was worth the cost demands comparison with other operations. Operation Biting at Bruneval in February 1942 captured a German Würzburg radar. It involved only 120 men and suffered just 2 killed. A surgical intelligence success, but with far less strategic permanence. Operation Archery at Vogsoy in December 1941 engaged 570 commandos and destroyed fish oil production. Only 17 killed. Hitler diverted 30,000 troops to Norway as a result. But the consequences, while significant, were temporary. The contrast with Dieppe in August 1942 is most instructive. Over 6,000 troops, primarily Canadian, attempted a frontal assault on a fortified port. They suffered catastrophic losses. 3,367 Canadian casualties alone. A 68% casualty rate. Only 1 commando objective succeeded. Dieppe earned 1 VC. Saint-Nazaire earned 5. Saint-Nazaire lost approximately 63% of its force killed or captured. But Saint-Nazaire achieved every primary objective. Dieppe achieved virtually none. The cost-benefit arithmetic is stark. 1 obsolete destroyer, 18 small craft, 169 lives, and in exchange the permanent denial of Germany's ability to operate its most powerful warship in the Atlantic. The Normandie dry dock was put out of commission for the remainder of the war. It was not functional again until 1947 and did not resume normal service until 1948. Tirpitz never entered the Atlantic Ocean. She remained in Norwegian fjords for the rest of her operational life, used only to threaten Arctic convoys. The destruction of the Normandie dock fundamentally changed the risk calculus. Without an Atlantic repair facility, any damage sustained during an Atlantic sortie would require a dangerous return through Royal Navy-controlled waters. Tirpitz was finally sunk by RAF Lancaster bombers in November 1944, never having fulfilled her strategic purpose. Operation Chariot produced 89 decorations, 5 Victoria Crosses, 4 Distinguished Service Orders, 17 Distinguished Service Crosses, 11 Military Crosses, 4 Conspicuous Gallantry Medals, 5 Distinguished Conduct Medals, 24 Distinguished Service Medals, 15 military medals, plus 51 mentions in dispatches. That is approximately 1 decoration for every 7 participants. No other single action of comparable size in the Second World War earned as many Victoria Crosses. One of those 5 was awarded to Sergeant Thomas Durrant. Aboard Motor Launch 306 during the withdrawal, he manned a Lewis gun in a 1-hour battle against the German torpedo boat Jaguar. Despite being shot at least 16 times in the head, both arms, legs, chest and stomach, he continued firing. He twice answered German calls to surrender with bursts of gunfire. He could only hold himself upright by gripping the gun mounting. The German captain was so moved that he personally visited the prisoner of war camp to tell Newman that Durrant should be recommended for a high decoration. It remains the only Victoria Cross in history recommended by the enemy. Think back to that moment at 0134 on March 28, 1942. A 23-year-old American destroyer with 4.5 tons of explosives in her bow, her bridge shattered by shell fire, her helmsman dead, her replacement wounded. The critics who dismissed her as obsolete were wrong. The planners who classified her as expendable were wrong. The German officers who boarded her that morning, laughing at the incompetent British captain who had simply run aground, were catastrophically wrong. Lieutenant Commander Beatty heard the explosion shake the building where he was being interrogated. He smiled. 1 destroyer, 1 dock, 1 decision that kept Tirpitz in Norway for the rest of the war. Today, Campbelltown's ship's belle resides at the Municipal Building in Campbelltown, Pennsylvania. A gun from her deck serves as a memorial in St. Nazaire itself. Every March, veterans and their descendants gather at Falmouth and St. Nazaire to remember. Lord Mountbatten told Newman afterward that having been associated with practically all combined operations from 2 man raids to the planning for Normandie, he had no hesitation in saying that the finest and most profitable of the lot was the raid on St. Nazaire. Churchill wrote that March closed for Britain with the brilliant and heroic exploit of St. Nazaire, a deed of glory intimately involved in high strategy. 4.5 tons of amytol, 11 hours of waiting, 1 obsolete destroyer that nobody wanted, the greatest raid of all.